And he's done it anyway. And you know what worries me about this, Mike, aside from the policy, is that if he gets away with this, which will be on a technicality if he does, if he gets away with it on those grounds, then the next 20 years of American politics are going to involve presidents, Republican and Democrat, seeing what they can do that they know Congress has not passed, that no one can complain about in the courts. And once you've done that, you've essentially abolished separation of powers in the American Constitution.
Charlie is a heck of a writer. If you read the National Review from time to time, you might have seen his stuff. He writes for other people as well and other places as well. And the reason I wanted to have him on today was, well, there were a lot of reasons, actually. One, he was returning the favor. I did his podcast a few months ago, and he promised to come on, and I was delighted. And two, I don't know of anybody who has taken a harder or more persuasive line on the insanity of forgiving student loans, except maybe me. Because there you go. I just use words like insanity because I think it's crazy. I think what's about to happen and what many, many people in our country and our government are pushing for is a kind of madness that's rooted in something profoundly and deeply unfair. And I've done my best over the years to articulate why I believe that and why I think the student loan forgiveness program as proposed is anathema to work ethic scholarships and the thing we try and celebrate at MicroWorks. But on a macro level, nobody's done a better job than Charles C.W. Cooke in explaining why this idea is not only morally repellent, but why it's fundamentally illegal. And I just really like where he's coming from on this topic, and I wanted to give him a chance to spell that out. You're really going to like this guy. You're going to like the way he talks, you know. He really sounds to me as though he's a man who went to Oxford and graduated with honors.
Which he did.
Indeed he did. He's a smart fella, and I like him, and you will too. And I love the fact that the oath he took, he takes seriously to this day. We talked about this briefly when you were kind enough to have me on your podcast, and I said I want to have you on this one to take a deeper dive, but you didn't pull any punches with the student loan forgiveness plan. God, I love that word, forgiveness.
Yeah.
In fact, I listened to your most recent rant and I thought, well, you know what? This is a great example of Charlie sitting down to write something because he's pissed off. And, you know, I mean, you know, people read your stuff, right?
I hope so.
Well, because when you said it before, it was funny. I say the same thing about writing. It's kind of therapeutic and it compresses time, and I do it because I like it, and I sometimes forget people actually read it. Yeah. But I don't know of anybody who's taken a harder line against the idea that we ought to forgive these loans, with the possible exception of me. You've been consistent on it. And I'd really like to hear you distill it, not only from the standpoint of its moral issue, right? But legally, how are we this close to seeing the executive do something that's going to open the door for future executives to do virtually anything?
Well, I'll start with the moral and then I'll come on to the legal. The idea, in my estimation, is revolting. And, you know, I've been writing about this area for a long time. I haven't been writing about student loan. They say forgiveness. They really mean transference, because you can't forgive the debt. The money's been spent. The people who received it have got it into their bank accounts and they've given it to the colleges and they've received the product that the colleges sell and they've benefited from it. So we're not forgiving anything. We're transferring liability for that debt away from the people who used the products to many people who didn't. That idea was really not popular or even proposed until a couple of years ago. This is a new phenomenon. But 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was writing about this fetishization of college that you and I talked about on my podcast. this idea that there's something wrong with you if you didn't go, and that the government's failed you if it didn't enable you going to college. And it's not because I hate college. I don't. I really liked college. But there was
Hmm.
a sort of moral
Oxford, right?
judgment. Yeah, I went to Oxford. Yeah, I really liked it. But I was
Graduated and everything, right?
I graduated. Yeah. But look, I was the first person, or the first man, I should say, in my family to go. And the upshot of that is that I know a lot of people who didn't go. And what bothered me about the way we started talking about this 6 or 7 years ago was there was an implicit moral judgment of the people who didn't go. And I also started to see it creep into legislation, where you would have all of these jobs that really did not require a degree for any reason that suddenly required a degree. And, my dad, who actually did eventually go to college in his 60s, just because he wanted to learn some history, my dad would say, well, I'm cutting back on work, and I want to volunteer my time, and this is a guy who had been in the Air Force, who'd run a business, who'd worked in various other industries. And they would say to him, do you have a degree? And he would say no. And they'd say, well, we can't use your time. That he's trying to volunteer. And I thought, well, that's the direct upshot. And to me, this student loan question is going to make that an awful lot worse. There's two big problems with it before we get to the legal part, I think. The first one is that it doesn't actually make whatever problem they're trying to solve better. It's not a reform. They're not changing the way college degrees work. They're not making it cheaper. They're not removing administrators. They're not even helping the guy who takes out a student loan 2 days after this is done. This is sort of a one-time lightning strike on the people who currently have student debt of a certain portion of it for no obvious reason, at a point in history in which they've got 2 or 3 years worth of repayment relief because of COVID, that they're in a better position than people who didn't go to college. They're earning more, they have better job prospects, they have better health outcomes, without making any of the changes to the system. So even if you like the system, I can't see the argument for it. And then you've got this distinction being drawn for no obvious cause between people who go to college and spend money and borrow money to do so, and people who don't go to college, but who still have to spend money or borrow money to get there. I mean, I live in North Florida, and you see everywhere people who work with their hands, roofers, carpenters, plumbers, electricians, HVAC guys. Now, these guys, they had to train, some of them were just taken on or they did apprenticeships. The guy who owns the business has loans. He has a fleet of F-150s or of vans. He has to buy the materials that they use. He has to pay his staff, even if times aren't great and the business is in trouble. Why not write off those loans? That guy was just as affected by COVID, probably more actually, than many students. This has not even been suggested. People would laugh if you said it in Washington, D.C. And I don't understand why, except for that we like students more, that we think if you go to college, you're a better person, you're more worthwhile, you somehow got skills that we need. And I think this is nonsense. And again, it's not because I dislike college, although I have some criticisms of the way colleges have begun to behave, and many courses that they teach. But it's not because I dislike college. It's because I value other things too. And, if you send this message to people that we are going to take money from the plumber, the electrician, the carpenter, the HVAC guys, and give it to college students purely because they went to college, you're not only sending the message that you too should go to college instead of being a plumber, which if you actually look at supply and demand in those areas is insane, but you're telling people your government likes the college student and he doesn't care about you. So it's not that I want the government to start sending checks to carpenters or plumbers. I don't. It's that I want them to do it to neither. Or if you absolutely have to, as we did with PPP, to both. But don't place one over the other. On the legal question, I would have given the answer I just gave you if you'd asked me, why is Congress considering forgiving student loans? But it is worse than that. Congress did not consider transferring student loans. They haven't done it. They've assiduously decided not to do it over and over again. There are not the votes for it. It just would not pass. We don't have the money. They don't have the number of legislators they need. It's not going through. And in America, when the legislative branch at the federal or state level doesn't do something, nothing happens. That's how the system is set up. Read Article 1. Literally the first words of Article 1. All legislative power, it says, are invested in the legislative branch. Joe Biden, when he came in, wanted to do this, and he got his lawyers to scour the statute books to find some law that had the words forgiveness in it. Couldn't find it. So they settled for a statute that says waive. This statute is the 2003 HEROES Act. This law was passed, I think, unanimously in the House of Representatives shortly after 9/11. And the aim of it was to prevent people who had volunteered to serve their country in a war or a national emergency, or people who were in emergency zones, sort of people who are helping, recover after a hurricane or what you will. The idea was to make it easier for them to continue their education if that's what they were doing, so that they wouldn't be put in a difficult administrative or financial position because they had decided to serve America or serve Americans. Biden has taken this law. He's taken, provision D of subsection 8 in it, which is really a cleaning up mechanism to make sure that those who are in the situation I just described are cared for. And he said every student in America counts. Every student in America has a loan. I mean, this is lunacy. No one thinks this. No one had ever said this before. Nancy Pelosi explicitly in 2021 said that the law did not do that the president could not do this on his own. The Department of Education, which is being used to do this, said in a memo in early 2021 that there is no authority to cancel or forgive or waive student loans. Biden knows this, and he's done it anyway. And you know what worries me about this, Mike, aside from the policy, is that if he gets away with this, which will be on a technicality if he does, because no court is going to look at the merits of it and decide he has the authority. If he gets away with this because the plaintiffs in the case lack what's called standing, which is direct harm, if he gets away with it on those grounds, then the next 20 years of American politics are going to involve presidents, Republican and Democrat, seeing what they can do that they know Congress has not passed, that no one can complain about in the courts. And once you've done that, you've essentially abolished separation of powers in the American Constitution, which is a massive disaster for our government. And it doesn't matter if you like the student loan plan or, take another example that we would, be more likely to favor in theory, which is abolishing all income taxes, right? I mean, I'd love that. But if the next Republican president said, I have decided for 1 year not to collect income taxes based on this esoteric reading of an emergency power that I found from a law that was passed after 9/11. And yeah, I know it's illegal, but you can't touch me because no one has standing to sue. I wouldn't support that. I would be utterly appalled by it because the president took an oath to uphold the Constitution and the law, and he'd be violating it.
It'd be tough, though. It'd be tough not to have a small, tasteful, quiet parade at the prospect of not paying any income tax for a year, right? True. But again, we're just confronted with the same old thing, a short-term dopamine hit for a long-term addiction or something much, much, much worse. And it's galling. Everything that's an excellent summation, by the way, and I'm not sure what to feel more outraged about, but I think it really does come back. It's funny. Why is it always an F-150?
Well, it's the most popular truck, right?
Well, I'm not allowed to say that because I did about 300 commercials for Ford once upon a time. But it always makes me laugh. It's never the Dodge Ram. It's never the GMC. It's never the Denali, right? But it is emblematic of a tool. And that tool, that work truck, that diesel truck, in all likelihood, the 350 really is what, I think there are more outstanding loans on those work trucks than any other necessary tool required to build the very universities that are at the very center of this conversation. And the fact that we are not able to look at a degree as a tool, but rather an investment, right? Uh, but somehow this truck is subordinate to that in some way. Just comparing the the accreditation or the credential to the tool, they're both tools,
Yeah,
and
of
they're
course.
both really important if you want to work in your chosen field. So, that's where my outrage always lands. It's just the basic fundamental thumb on the scale of saying this tool matters hugely and this one not at all.
Yeah, and think about you mentioned cognitive dissonance earlier. Think about the cognitive dissonance that is necessary to make the case that those who are in favor of this policy are making. Because you cannot have it both ways. If college is such a wonderful consumer product that all who borrow money and spend it on college come out better off, if their prospects are improved, then there really is no case for giving them other people's money. If college is a scam that leaves people in debt without the capacity to pay it off and doesn't provide what it is advertised as providing, then subsidizing it to the tune of $400 billion without making any reforms is absolutely preposterous. I
Where's
mean,
the
if you,
FTC? I mean, I mean,
right,
if that's the argument, then you're really talking about a flawed, dangerous product that's out there for sale, not just for sale, but being affirmatively marketed in the most persuasive ways possible. That's to me where it really gets insidious. I know how to sell an F-150. I know how to sell the tool, its feature, its benefit, and some snazzy music and some handsome actors, and boom, you have a commercial. But the way we're selling college is very, very different. We're turning the screws of guilt in parents. We're applying unthinkable pressure to a kid's peer group and cohorts, the pressure to borrow money that they have no hope of ever repaying. You got the guidance counselors involved, turning a slightly different screw, and all the avenues are converging. It's not just a commercial. It is it's a sensibility. It's a cause of action, right? And it's been drip, drip, drip for 50 years. And this to me is the tipping point. And this is why I get a little hyperbolic with it as well. I think you're absolutely right. I don't know of I can't think of a bigger issue right now. Just back to the moral thing, the legal is out of my lane, but just morally, if we do this morally, what in the world are we going to do next?